For the final video game tutorial that we're going to look at, we're going to make a platform game. And this platform game is going to be a little bit different to the one that we made earlier on. We're actually going to make a more advanced engine. This engine is going to have friction in it, so that when you let go of the control, you're still going to slide a little bit, plus your guy's going to accelerate. It's going to have platforms that you can jump through, hopefully, if we can get those working. Wall jumping, double jumping, mouse aim, and a few other things that are pretty cool. Now, this is an engine that I developed, probably took about 2 or 3 hours to trial everything in here. And what I'm going to give you is the Sprite Resources. Now, these Sprite Resources have come from a website, this one here, the Open Game Art website, and they're these sprites, this little guy here, and also, where is it? This one in here as well. So I've used these sprites, and I'm going to actually give you those because it took me a little while to import them, and you can work with them for this tutorial. So what you're going to need to do is go to File menu, and then Import Resources, and find the resource called game.gmres, and then open that. This will be on the Moodle if you can't find it, and download it, put it somewhere, and then open it up. You'll want to import your sprites and your backgrounds. Now, I'm not going to give you the objects, you're going to be making those, and click OK. So you should have these sprites here, and some of them are named a little bit funny. Sprite 7, be a good idea to rename that to SPR Cursor. Sprite 8, SPR Stand, and Sprite 9 doesn't look like there's anything in it, so we can delete that. I must have accidentally loaded that. Now, first thing we're going to do is make a room, and I'm going to show you a little bit more about tiles. So we're going to create a room. We're going to change this to 16 by 16. And now the settings for this game, it's the speed that this guy's going to be running at is really, really fast. We probably don't need it to be this high. 240 should be enough for the height, or maybe even less. But we're going to make the room quite wide. So if you make it about 3000 wide, so it's quite a wide room that we're looking at. And we can just call it room 0. We're going to put in some objects later, but backgrounds, we're going to set a background which is going to be this background here. If you want to change the hue on this, you can edit the background. Go to transform, image, colorize, and you can change the hue to whatever you want. So if you prefer it to be more green or dark blue or whatever, you can change it. So I might just leave it where it is and click tick. So there's our background. I don't need that on while I'm laying out the tiles. If I go to tiles and down the bottom here, you can see my tile set is in here. Now, some of this stuff I'm going to want to lay out along the floor, and I can just kind of, if I bring this in, how do I go? Middle mouse button will bring that in. Lay these across there, all the way across. It's quite a long room. Now remember, these tiles are not the same thing as blocks. So this is just one level. I can zoom in and out, and middle mouse button will let you drag things around. So I could then put different blocks in different locations. Have some of these stacked up here, like that. Put some of these going up for no reason. Up to the top. You can put some things along the top here. So get an interesting looking level. So I'm going to build that level up later. I'll pause the video so you don't have to watch me do that. And we're just going to create one simple object. It's going to be an object block. And it's going to use the block sprite. This is going to be solid, and that's all. And then what we're going to do here is go back into here, objects, wherever we want the player to be able to stand, we can do that. Now, I may have made this block a bit too dark. You may have to go into it, change it, maybe pick a different color that's going to stand out like green and fill it with that, making sure that it's opaque, not solid, and that way I can see now exactly where I've put these blocks, and I don't want to miss out on anything, so I'm just going to go all the way along here, just holding down shift and dragging. I won't worry about going the rest of the way, and wherever I've got one of these blocks here. That bit there could be a ladder. I haven't allowed for ladders in this. It's going to be much faster paced than the previous ones that we've done. And so we've got a very basic room here. Let's put a block just outside here. Oops. And it may ask us, you may see down the bottom here, delete underlying. That will overwrite anything that's underneath it, so you don't get those double ups there. Now this is outside of the room, and when you click the tick, it will say there's objects outside of the room. Sometimes you'll want to say yes. In this case, I put them outside the room so the player can't go back to the left, but they also can't fall outside the room. So I want them to be there, so I'm going to click no. Now we're going to create the player, and we're going to build this up bit by bit and test it out in little steps. Now this is quite complex. In fact, I'll show you the outcome that we're going to be looking at. So this might be a long video, I might split it up. So the player is going to have a create event, a step event, begin step, collision with object, no key, A key, D key, mouse, and W. Now what this looks like when it's done is this here. So I've got my little guy, he's animated tapping his feet. If I move left or right, you can see that friction working there. When he jumps, there's a jump animation. And the jump animation doesn't seem to be properly working yet. You can double jump, and I can also wall jump as well. So I can get up this area here by wall jumping all the way up, and I'm along the top there, and I can actually fall outside the screen at the moment like that, and so there's no way to get back, but you can see what it's going to be like. The other thing I didn't show you was the knife throwing. So I can throw knives and they'll arc like that, and they'll go towards the cursor. The further away the cursor is, the faster the knife will be thrown. So if I move it towards the cursor, it doesn't throw it very far, and further away. And if it hits a wall, it's destroyed. You can see there that it arcs up like that, like it would sort of in real life. So that's what we're going to be doing. I don't have an animation for the knife throwing bit, and I'm not going to. So that's what we're going to be working towards. So the first thing we need in here is a create event, where we need to create the object, and we're going to call it obj, what happened then? obj underscore player. And we're going to start with the sprite player. Now that'll change fairly quick, but we're going to add an event, the create event. And in here we're going to set up some variables that we'll use throughout the program, so we don't have to change a whole lot of numbers when we're trialing stuff. So we're going to set the friction though. The friction is going to be set to 0.6. So 0.6 is what I had it at. You might want to change it, test it. If you put it at 1, that's basically 100% friction, and you'll not be able to move. So anything less than that is fine. However, the more friction you have, the harder it will be to accelerate, and it'll decelerate much quicker. If you set it to 0, you'll never stop. You'll slide all over the place. But you can test it out for yourself later. The next thing we're going to do is set a whole bunch of variables. So we're going to create a variable called max speed. And that's going to be equal to 8. To start with, you can change that max speed. I'm going to set a variable can jump, and that's going to be equal to 0. Third variable we're going to set is going to be called jump speed, and we'll make these all lowercase, to -13. Now once again, these are variables, are values that I decided on after a whole lot of trialing, and you might think it doesn't feel right, so when we actually get it working, you can change those and see what you think is going to work. Now I'll explain why we've done those when we actually start using them, but you should see that it's going to be much quicker to test things because, well, I'll just explain it when we get up to that. Last thing we're going to do is change the sprite into Sprite player. So we're actually going to change the sprite into SPR player. The sub-image is going to be -1. Now, if we set it to anything else, it's going to mean that the image never changes. But if we put it at -1, it's going to animate. And we also need to set the speed to 0.2. You could set the speed faster. Once again, that's going to be something. Let's actually put in here another variable, control, animation speed, all lowercase. And I'm going to set that to 0.2. And now I'm going to change the sprite, SPR player, -1, and I'm going to put animation speed in here. So what I did, I set animation speed to 0.2, and then I just typed animation speed in here. Now if I want to change animation speed, I can just change it here, and it will change everywhere else that animation speed occurs. And so later on when we're changing sprites, and we're going to be changing a whole lot of sprites in this one, we can just, if we want to change the speed that something animates, we can just change this number instead of going through every single one. So that's the create event, and that's pretty straightforward. Now we're going to do the step event. The step event is very similar to the other one that we've already done. We're going to test some variables. So what we want it to do, we want it to fall down, and we also want to limit the horizontal speed. So that's what we'll do here. So we'll test if the H speed is greater than the maximum speed. So somehow he's accelerated is larger than the max speed. So if the horizontal speed is larger than the maximum speed that we've allowed the character to go, then we're going to set the horizontal speed to the maximum speed. So if the maximum speed gets up to 13, we're going to set it back to 12. If it gets up to 18 by some way, we're going to set it back to 12. So in essence, it's never going to be allowed to go more than 12. And same thing for the other way around, except we're going to say H speed is less than negative max speed and smaller than. So this is going the other direction. And then we're going to set the horizontal speed to negative max speed. Now if we want to change max speed, and so we can make it go slower or faster, we only need to change this one number here. So I can make it 8, 10, whatever, instead of going through and changing all of these things in here, which are 4 different values. So those 4 different things are all using the value max speed, and we've defined that back here. So we only need to change it once instead of 4 times. Much more efficient. In fact, if you want to get merit and excellence, you're going to need to use those kind of efficient things, using variable names instead of hard coding all those numbers in there. So I'm going to put a comment on here. This is something else you're going to need to do for merit and excellence, and achieved. In fact, you'll need to comment to have achieved, which is going to be explaining what your programming does. So it doesn't actually do anything in the game. Game Maker ignores it. It's just for us to know. This bit of code limits the horizontal speed. This next bit of code is going to limit and set gravity. So now we're going to do what we did in the other platformer, which is to check if a position is collision free. So the position below the object, 1. I think I did 1. Yep, I did 1. And make sure it's relative. That means it's below the current object. And if that is position free, so it means there's nothing underneath it, we're going to set the gravity down to 1. Else, meaning that this condition was not true, so we're going to do this one instead, we're going to set the gravity to 70 to 0. So this means that there is something below it, this means that there isn't. And that's all for that step there. Now we're going to do the A key and D key events now. Now the reason I chose that was because A and D are much easier to use when you've got the mouse. Otherwise your hands are too close together when you've got them on the arrow keys. But if you want to use the arrow keys, you can. I'm not sure why that's in the way there. So let's add an event, keyboard, letters, and it's just off screen for you, A. So the A key, pretty straightforward here. We're just going to check to see if a position is collision free, and it's going to be -1 because this is left and right, and that's the x-axis. So A is the left one. We're going to check to the left, which is -1 on the x-axis. And if it is collision free, we're going to set the horizontal speed. Now this is where things get different from the other tutorial. The other tutorial uses jump, which is okay, but it's not very good. It doesn't feel right when you're actually playing the game. So we're going to set the horizontal speed to -1 relative. And this is going to cause it to accelerate. Because the first time we push left, A, it's going to set it to -1, then -2, then -3 as the speed, then -4, and it's going to get faster and faster. So it's going to work out to be quite a cool little event. And we're also going to transform the sprite so it's actually turning in the opposite direction. We're just going to mirror it horizontally, and that's all we need to do. We don't need to worry about the scale or anything. The D key is pretty much the same, so let's just duplicate this event. Keyboard, letters, D. And in here we're going to check the other side. So we'll make that, a 1. Set the horizontal speed to 1 relative. And transform the sprite, no mirroring. Now you might think, why do I need to do this if I'm not changing anything? This is actually going to reset it if it has mirroring on it. So if it's been mirrored, we want to reset it and put no mirroring on it. So what we should be able to do now is test our room if I put this object in it, and hopefully this little guy will work. Now it's going to come up very, very long across there. Oh, he fell off the screen. Okay, but the gravity's working at least. So there's a few more things we need to do before we test it. And that's going to be the collision with the object. So add collision with the block. We're going to move to contact. Now this is something that has to be done whenever you do a collision with a block and you want the player to stop. Because what can happen, if they're moving at speed 12, it means they're roughly moving 12 pixels a second, and they may end up colliding with the block in the middle of the block as they're moving down. So at 1 minute they might be kind of 4 pixels above the block, and then the next minute, or the next step, if they're moving at 12 pixels per step, there might be 10 pixels into the block. So we want to actually just move so it's touching the block. Direction can be direction, maximum -1, which is just unlimited. If you set it to 12 or something else, it sometimes glitches out. I just leave it at -1 and let the computer deal with that. And against solid objects. So that's that bit there. And now here's where we're going to have a whole lot of different little bits to do with moving against objects, because there's lots of glitchy bits in here. And so we're going to sort this out and make it fairly robust. So the program is going to account for all situations. And I'm going to need a bit of space to do this. So first of all, I'm going to grab a control and say, if there is a collision, and this, I'm going to check below the object. If there's a collision below the object, oops, just a sec, which should be 1. Yep. If there's a collision below the object, and I'm going to also check, is V speed greater than 0, means they're moving down, then I'm going to set the vertical speed to 0. So that's pretty straightforward there. If there's an object below the current object, so if there's a block below it, if the V speed is larger than 0, so if we're actually moving, then set it to 0. Stop. We don't want to go any further through it. Then I'm going to copy this because the next bits of code are all pretty much identical. And so I'm going to delete this. And I need it 4 times, and I'll put this back at the top. So the first one, I'm going to put a comment there. Check for block below. Now I'm going to put a comment after this one. This is going to be check for block above. Because if I don't do that, what can happen is my character ends up flying and he can just get stuck on the roof of an object and stay there forever. So we're going to check to see, is there an object above? Is v speed larger than 0? Set the vertical speed to 0. Now there may still be a glitch here and I may have to figure that out later, but we'll sort that out when we get there. Check for object to left, because if we are moving and we're kind of touching an object on the left or the right, we don't want it to stop and float in the air. So that's what we're going to make a modification here. So if there's an object at position x minus 1, y 0, relative, if h speed is less than 0, then we're going to set the horizontal speed to 0. And it's the same for the other one, except on the other side. So 1, this is h speed, larger than 0. Set the horizontal speed to 0. And I'll put that comment in here. Check for object on right side. And so now I've got that all sorted out. The last thing to do is for double jumps, and we'll add that in later. But I should be able to check this out now. So you can see my little guy over here. He's running. He's not really got any problems at the moment, and I haven't told him to jump, but it all seems like it's working really well. Excuse me. Now what we want to do is, before we go any further, make it so that we can't actually see the whole screen, because that's going to make it really difficult to view. So let's go into the room and go to Views, and in a minute I'll stop this video and we'll move on to the next one because it's getting quite long. Enable the use of views, visible when the room starts, and we want to change this so that the view in the room is 320 by 240. It's actually the size of our room, so we can see this little bounding box that comes around it. I might actually do it even smaller. I might do it half that, 160 by, what would half of that be, 140? No, 120. And then I've got the port on screen. How big do I want this to display on the screen? Well, I'll leave it at 640 by 480. It's going to stretch everything out, but it might look all right. I want the view to follow an object. I'm going to make it follow the player. And I'm just going to put a stupid high number in here, which will keep the player in the center of the view. So if I push play now, you'll see there's my player. He's running. I can run across that stuff. There's a few little glitchy bits here, which I'll explain why it's doing that in a moment. These lines shouldn't be there. But I've got the makings of a game at the moment. So in the next video we're going to look at jumping, double jumping, setting all his animations up, and getting that knife throwing happening as well, and then finishing up the level.